Yoga is a living, breathing, evolving practice where we get to connect to more of who we are, let go of the chaos and the suffering, let go of the attachment, and really connect to our true selves. Hi, I'm Monica Phillips. I'm the founder of Sparkplug Labs. We do executive leadership coaching for individuals, teams, and groups. I started this video podcast series, Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, to bring some of the ancient wisdom of yoga to show you how it helps us overcome fear, deal with a world full of anxiety and stress, and so much change. I'm a certified yoga teacher, and I'm excited to share these episodes with you, full of interviews with world-class leading yoga authorities across the US and Canada who teach globally. I hope you enjoy them. Please join me off the mat. Hello and welcome to Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, where we explore how ancient wisdom supports modern leadership, work, and life. I'm your host, Monica Phillips, and today's episode is on courageous presence, how yoga shapes modern legal leadership. I am joined by two extraordinary leaders who embody what it means to lead with presence, clarity, and courage. Carolyn Herzog, Chief Legal Officer at Elastic, and Alice Geene, former Chief Legal Officer at Paycor. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Both Carolyn and Alice have navigated high-pressure, high-stakes legal environments while bringing yoga, mindfulness, and intentionality into the heart of their leadership. Their practices inform how they show up for their teams, how they make decisions rooted in truth, and how they create space for trust, connection, and community. In this conversation, we'll explore how mindful leadership can transform not only how we work, but how we relate, communicate, and cultivate environments where people feel seen and supported. So let's dive in. I'd love to introduce you both just briefly. Carolyn Herzog is the Chief Legal Officer at Elastic, a global technology company known for its search, security, and observability solutions. With extensive experience leading legal, compliance, and public policy teams across high-growth, high-impact tech environments, Carolyn is widely recognized for her thoughtful, value-centered approach to leadership. She is the recipient of the NACD Directorship 100 in recognition of her role in board governance excellence. And she is a longtime practitioner of yoga and mindfulness, bringing presence, intentionality, and courage into the boardroom and across her global teams. Carolyn champions trust, inclusion, and clarity as the foundations of modern legal leadership. And I know that anyone who's been part of her teams, present or past, can champion and support how incredible it is to work with her. Alice Geene is a longtime C-suite leader and chief legal officer in tech companies and the former chief legal officer at Paycor, a leading HR and payroll technology company focused on empowering people-first workplaces. Throughout her career, Alice has built strong collaborative legal teams rooted in openness, integrity, and authentic communication. A dedicated student of yoga and mindfulness, she infuses her leadership style with grounded presence, compassion, and the courage to lead with truthfulness. Alice is known for creating space where teams feel supported, connected, and able to thrive. And I've also had the pleasure of meeting your past colleagues, Alice, who have just been grateful for the experience to learn from your leadership for both of you.
Thank you.
So welcome again. I'm so glad you're here. And I'd love to start the conversation by talking about how you both got here. Alice, on our first conversation, you mentioned that you were also a yoga teacher, had done yoga teacher training. I'd love to hear what originally drew you to the practice of yoga and what's important about yoga for you as a leader.
Yeah, so I remember the first time you and I met, Monica, and then us discovering that we shared this interest and this passion. And, you know, it's so funny because it's such a central part of my life. I actually began practicing yoga almost accidentally. I was a summer associate in a big New York law firm. And one of my colleagues, I was on a case with him. His fiance was a yoga instructor in Manhattan. And she invited me to a class. And it was a wonderful experience. And I loved it. And I kept going back. I will tell you, I think for a long time, like yoga to me was about beautiful poses and it was about stress relief. And I think all of those things are valuable and really, really wonderful. And that was how I sort of treated yoga in my life, as this interest or pursuit. And this took some time. I mean, I think it took years, but then it began to become something much more meaningful And I started to recognize that it was a practice that brought gratitude and awareness of the importance of community and a way of seeing both inwardly and outwardly the gifts that people have to offer. And it became, I think, not just a physical practice, but really sort of a mental, spiritual, and kind of outlook on life practice. And it became so important to me that ultimately in 2019, I decided to get a yoga teacher certification, which I did. I did my 200-hour teacher certification. I even taught in a gym in Chicago where I live for about 4 months, and that was a really wonderful experience. I haven't really returned to formally teaching in a gym or a studio environment since then, but it's something that I just try to integrate into my work and my relationships and my outlook on life at this point.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic. Thank you. Carolyn, how about you? What was your journey to yoga and how does it show up for you and as your role as a leader?
Yeah, it's such a fun question, and this is such a fun way to spend part of our day. You made me think because I was trying to remember when I started doing yoga, and my earliest memory that I can remember doing yoga was when I was pregnant with my first child. And exercise has always been a way for me to have some stress relief, to get out and do something where you feel like you did something for yourself, because we're working, and then when you become working moms or just all the things that we're doing and leading teams, you're always thinking about other people, and it was the one thing I could do for myself. And I think when I couldn't do other things from an exercise perspective, I ended up taking a yoga class, which is kind of funny being pregnant. If you've seen pregnant ladies doing yoga, it's a challenging twisty turny act to navigate. But what I found was that it aligned really well with my personality. I'm not a particularly competitive person. So whenever I've been on teams, I was always like, it's as long as we're all doing our best, it's great. And but I do think I'm pretty ambitious, and so yoga to me has been a really interesting journey because it is so dependent on the instructor. The instructor really creates the experience, creates the environment. And I've tried yoga in various places where I've lived and traveled. And I think finding the studio or the place that you can really call home, and really developing the community around you while you're just personally challenging yourself. So like Alice, I think initially it's sort of like, can I do that pose, or could I do that pose last week, but I can't do it today, and why? And it does have an iterative process where your experience is unique every time you go, but maybe once you finally get one pose and you try to work on it even more. And I think at my age now too, there's things that I'm just quite proud of myself for being able to do in a yoga class. I'm also not a great meditator. I've tried and it just makes my brain busier, but yoga is the one place where I have found I can have a more meditative experience. I can actually find that I'm a better person walking out of yoga class than I was going in. And that is, that's reflected in my day-to-day life and in my day-to-day work, and it's something that I enjoy talking about. I'm actually dressed for yoga today. I didn't even do that intentionally because of our podcast, but I find when I put on my yoga clothes in the morning and I know that I'm going to my yoga class at night, it's on my mind and it's something that I commit to, and I feel perfectly comfortable telling others on my team, well, I'll be at yoga class, from 6 to 7. I'm not available then, but you can talk to me before, or you can talk to me after.
I love those journeys to yoga so far. And as an executive coach, I meet a lot of busy executives and hyperachievers who are afraid to pause and sometimes have some reflection like, oh, I know I should do this, but there's a sense that it might weaken them. Talk to me about how you both integrate mindfulness and presence and this practice that you've learned on the mat into the boardroom, into the leadership team, to model how that can actually, which is what we all know, make us better performers, better teammates, better community members.
So, I mean, I'll maybe start by offering, my most recent full-time job ended in the spring, and I've had time to rest and recharge and reflect a little bit. And I don't know that I was necessarily doing it sort of intentionally or consciously at the time, but like integrating some of the principles of yoga, like we're all stronger in community, or every individual is where they are and they have challenges and they also have gifts to offer, and practicing yoga is about finding and tapping those gifts. I think I found that as a leader, I tried to integrate some of those learnings and those principles with how I put together teams and I coached teams, and I tried to help teams work together and work with people, on very high stakes things, in technology companies, which can often be very fast paced and very full of complexity and present in-house legal departments with all kinds, of multiple daily challenges. And, I think I would say I feel like it's hard to kind of unpack the data around this, but being intentional, helping everybody to understand that they had a unique talent to contribute to a question, a project, an initiative, and also that everybody, had a challenge, and that that's inherent in being human, and that part of it was, you become better by acknowledging the challenge and trying to stretch yourself into it in an appropriate way, so that you can learn and so that everybody around you can learn. It's taken me, I think, some months to maybe articulate and put some words to it, but I feel like, yoga has been very integral in how I tried to approach the job of being a CLO and building teams and getting people to work effectively together and with internal colleagues at companies.
It's so interesting. I think a lot about one of the principles of yoga, which is practice, not perfection, and
Mhm.
how that connects to our work every day. Because particularly as in-house leaders, perfection is an elusive goal, right? It is just not something you can't execute on the things that we need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. You can't manage in a crisis if you're aiming for perfection. But the more that you practice, the more that you exercise connecting to others and what others know and how they can bring that to your practice, the better off you are. Yoga is so individualistic that even when instructors are, showing somebody how to do a pose, they'll acknowledge on a regular basis, this is going to be different for you. You may have one side that's better than the other. You may have sides that vary from day to day. You may balance differently than others. Your body and how your body works is going to reflect how you do yoga. And so there may be some poses that you're great at and that are easier for you, and others that are much harder to achieve, or maybe even impossible to achieve because your body just won't stretch that way. I also think about the focus time because, I can remember starting work and before cell phones and before we were all distracted by social media and, getting a Slack and an email and a text and the various ways that we can communicate with each other today. And being able to spend some time concentrating on just what you're doing in that moment is really important. It's important for individual contributors, it's important for leaders. Figuring out when do you just dive in and when do you take a breath and give yourself a pause and think about what you're going to do next is really, really important.
I hear in what you're saying, Carolyn, this idea of satya, which is one of the 5 yamas, the first of the 8 limbs of yoga. And satya means truthfulness. And it is really this way of acting and thinking with integrity. And it's a lot different than like, oh, I didn't lie, right? Truthfulness is,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, this range of being perfect, that we are not perfect. This was actually in a Ted Lasso scene. I was rewatching Ted Lasso recently. They had this whole conversation about humans are not perfect. And a lot of times, especially, I see this so often in the legal industry where associates are hiding out in their office, afraid to ask for help until they get the perfect answer.
Mm-hmm.
And Satya, I feel, can really help us shine a light on how we are part of a community, part of a team. And when we make that commitment, when we have the courage to be vulnerable to say, I need help with this, or how would you approach this, or have you done this before? What was the reaction? What was the result? How could I make this better? We actually get something so much better.
Mm-hmm.
But some cultures don't allow for that courage to create trust. And then it keeps people from leaning into that sattvic or satya, the truthfulness of the experience.
Yeah, there's a vulnerability in that too, right? To be able to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, but let me think about it. Let me go ask some people that I know who may be able to contribute to the answer. And the answer isn't always, again, in perfection. You have to figure out, when do I need an answer right now because I'm dealing with an emergency? Or when do I need to do some more analysis and scope? And I think the more senior you become, the more comfortable you can also become with not knowing everything, and having a team around you of experts who are the person, who really knows this one particular area, and you know how to draw in that expertise from others. And that's what we look for in yoga instructors too, right? Is that you get a different experience from different people. Some people are just amazing at providing that sort of meditative instruction. Some people are really good at helping you balance better and thinking about, how you're structuring your body in a way to keep, a more stable balance.
Carolyn, can I ask you, have you, in the practice of it regularly in a workplace environment, been able to see team members grow into comfort with challenge and opportunity by practicing? It's authentic and it's okay to not be perfect and to say, I don't know, and to reach out and to ask for help?
It's such a great question, Alice, and I think it goes a lot to leadership and what kind of environment are you creating. Monica, you touched on this, and that if you are afraid to ask a question, if you're afraid to show that you don't know something, then you have to, I think as a leader, you have to step back and think, well, why is that person afraid? It's not just this person is too perfectionist or there's something wrong with them. You have to think about, well, what's the environment that I'm creating to create a safe space so that people know to share their thoughts and to ask questions. And particularly now, as we're going through this transformative time with AI and people are looking at the future of their careers, it's going to be even more important for people to think about, well, how am I actually taking the knowledge that I have and applying judgment or asking questions and thinking through the process? That's the greater value that we provide, not providing the perfect answer.
Can I just laugh for a second that we said AI? I was doing a little mental math in my head, how long it would take during the podcast to raise AI, because it's all over everyone's minds. And yoga is about the practice of being human. And sometimes it's very hard to square that with this world where there's so much pressure to bring it in to how we're working. And the challenge in my mind is how do you bring it in, which we can see, we're all called upon to do it, but how do we then retain the best of what is human, which is I think at its essence, what yoga is about.
It is. And it's also what this practice is about, what the legal practice is about. It's about, I mean, when you think about how law is formed, it starts first in culture, right? And then culture then translates into law, and then law is then interpreted again by the human experience. And so there is no perfection in law either. There's only this evolving experience and interpretation of law, which is very, if you think about employment law and how different employment law is in France versus in, United States, these are huge cultural shifts. And we're going through a cultural shift now with AI. I think about it all the time. I work in an AI company, but I also think about it in ways in terms of the governance and the responsibility. We've talked about, leading with authenticity and truthfulness and integrity. AI is going to change the way we're working, but it also can be a great equalizer. As you said, Alice, AI can't do yoga, right? AI can't be mindful. AI can't reflect on the various situations and say, well, there's no perfect answer, but let's think through it.
It can't give you
And
a
it can't
experience.
balance the data with judgment.
Right.
It will never replace that.
We were talking before we started recording about the woo. I had a vision recently, about maybe 6 months ago, about a person in collaboration with an AI figure. And the AI figure was kind of you can just set it down. You have everything you need within you. And I feel like so often we are so attached to what's here that we forget about what's here. And we forget that we're not just up here, and we're always driving with more thought, mind, right? And we forget that we have a heart, that we have a soul, that we have a body. And we maybe know more than we think we know, but we're afraid to put down our phones, put down our AI agents, put it down and say, what am I experiencing? What do I know is true in my body? How do I see another person as a human being and show up in this moment to meet them with what they have? And sometimes it is that is needed, this human experience to say, I see that you made a mistake because you're human, and I see you and recognize that you can do better and I want to help you get there. Not here's the perfect answer, right? Or I see that there was a crisis that we had some poor judgment, but what could we do? Or the opposite, right? We had this outcome because 7 people came together and created a solution that was so much better than we could have done on our own, because we were hearing about the experiences of our customers, of our community, of this creation.
So, I think it's an interesting way to approach how yoga connects to work. And Alice, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. It's for me, as I was hearing you talk, Monica, I was also thinking, yeah, but there's crisis every day, and there's responses, and there's small mistakes, and then there's catastrophic mistakes. And so to me, it's about how do you create an environment for practice so that people can move quickly, can make decisions quickly, can feel comfortable in that, and can recover when there's a mistake, or can recover and pivot when they say, like, that's not working, let's go in another direction. And I do think there's elements in yoga. You could equate a lot of things in terms of, well, this isn't, I'm not feeling balanced on my left side today. So what is it? Am I not looking in the right place? Am I not, focused on my core? What are the tricks that I've learned? What are the things that I've practiced to be able to get there? I don't know, Alice, what do you think?
I mean, I think you're right in the sense that, while I don't think yoga practice was sort of like constructed with how do I like help in-house legal teams be effective at like managing complexity and crisis and pace. There's a lot in it that can really help in those situations. And I mean, I think one thing I would say is, Monica asked about satya, like truthfulness. And I think that that principle of if you did the work, right? If you got your data, you thoughtfully laid out the options and you said, I believe this is the right path, then that is the satya, the truth of it. And yes, it's very high stakes and everybody is very emotional and there's people who don't agree with each other, but you did the work and I think that you shouldn't back down from saying it authentically and truthfully and directly. I think you should also be open-minded. And, the reason we bring together lots of smart people from different functions and with different perspectives is to try to achieve, some direction that reflects everybody's needs and goals. But like, just sort of like having confidence that, if you did the work around it, then that's the truth of it. And you should have the confidence in that to say it and to say, this really came from a place of, understanding and knowledge and thoughtfulness. I think that's where the practice of yoga regularly and consistently sort of like helps bring that into the workplace and how you communicate and how you work with other people to try to get to decisions.
Yeah, it does help you calm your mind, right? To think through things in a very sort of sequential way. Like Monica, you talked about woo, and like I'm not particularly woo. I don't think in my day to day or my practice, but I do think I'm very people oriented, and which is not always equated to the legal profession as being about people. But I do think about what individuals bring to the table, their individual strengths. There's people that you want in a crisis. There's people that you actually want to be the people that sit back and think through all the facts to inform you as you move towards a new strategy, something that is like AI again, right? That you haven't answered all the questions before. There are no specific answers. We're still navigating that. And there's people who are just the great thought leaders who spend the time to say, well, what about this and what about that? And again, creating that safe space to allow for that kind of conversation.
I know a
And
lot
to
of leaders.
say we are where we are which is we know some of it and we don't know some
Mm-hmm.
of it or a lot of it, and that's okay because that is where we are.
Mm-hmm. I meet a lot of leaders who know this intuitively, know about the different models of leadership, know about creating safe space and a foundation of trust, know what the impact it can make to create mindfulness. And the practicality of it is not always so easy. How have you each practically created space for your teams to feel heard, grounded, and safe to speak honestly?
My last company, Paycor, where I was for nearly 5 years, I led a virtual team of 16 people, um, lawyers and non-lawyer professionals. And it was, very classic tech company, extremely fast paced every day, multiple challenges, and everyone had a very big job and a very big role to play in trying to navigate all of those questions and challenges. And I think that I tried very hard to bring the team together in person 3 to 4 times a year for in-person offsites. And um, they were not just around the questions of our company, or the initiatives of the day. I always tried to create some space for, like, what is it that we should be reflecting on and trying to change positively in order to be more effective and better as a team and for our organization. And I think that at the heart is sort of what yoga calls upon us to do, which is to look inward and to say, like, what is positive that you want to name and that you want to practice in your life. And I think that that's what we were doing, even though we weren't calling it yoga or meditation. Actually, I did bring in, towards the end of our time together, some mental health and wellness speakers, specifically for lawyers. I think that there's definitely an industry in this because law is so high pressure. I'm sure Carolyn is familiar with this as well. And it was interesting because while we didn't necessarily practice yoga, they definitely brought in a lot of meditation and breath work to just pause the system and to get everybody to slow down and breathe and reflect.
Yeah, I agree, Alice. I think also, well, I've actually, I had my offsite a couple weeks ago with my team. And also I run a virtual team. So this team is quite different from other teams where I've been in the office or we're more centralized. People are everywhere and they really come as they are. And it's important to create a space where people do get to know each other and build that trust, and and know that they can rely on people and can ask questions when it's not necessarily something that they know about in advance. I also think there's something different about being in person, and we've actually done like early morning optional exercise, and I've led a yoga class with the team for that with another person, and just I think integrating whatever it is that helps you be more mindful. Some people need to run and just get into that space. Some people play music, whatever it is that gives you that time to reflect and realize that work is important, but the response that you have shouldn't always be a personal response. It should be an intellectual response, and you need to give yourself that space and that mental well-being to be able to respond to challenging situations or unfamiliar situations in a very practical, pragmatic way. If you respond with emotion inside a company, and particularly as things are moving quickly, we both work in tech and things move incredibly quickly. That's not going to help you bring others along. It's not going to help you get to the right answer. So you have to be able to reflect and be able to respond with facts, with process, with inclusion to be able to get to the right answers quickly.
How was it received to practice yoga and meditation at the
Well,
offsites?
it was great. It was optional, right? So there was one thing
Mm-hmm.
is that it's not it wasn't a lot of this isn't coming from me necessarily. I'd like to think I'm creating this space for people to have this kind of optionality, but then we have a development committee within our team, and there are people that said we really want to focus on wellness and well-being. And I said, fantastic, I fully support it. So sometimes it just comes from your support. And then one team member who's also practicing yogi asked would I co-teach this class, and we had other people that wanted to go out for a run, other people, that one group even went and did parkour, and some people just wanted to walk and talk, some people wanted to sleep in. So I think creating an optional environment where you create, just the opportunity and awareness that it's available to people is something that is quite nice.
I did it with the board of directors and the executive team at a quarterly board meeting. I led it. It was an intimidating experience.
That would be, that's
But
very intimidating, but I'm impressed.
well, now maybe people were telling me what I wanted to hear, but it was like a beloved experience. I think it was like, okay, this is not the usual like steak dinner. Like we're trying something different, and we're trying, to build, a vibe as a group and as a team of people that needs to work regularly together.
That's awesome.
I love the different ways you've modeled how this can show up. It unnerves me when someone says, "Oh, you need a yoga class, right?" And it's like this person is just struggling to find time to pick up their kids or make dinner. They don't need a yoga class. What they need is to sleep in, or what they need is space in their day to find that. And the power to create boundaries, and sometimes knowing that this practice of yoga is a reflection of kindness toward yourself.
It also can be incredibly awkward, right? And so I think creating a space where people can say, you can say like, close your eyes right now and just think, and to, when we're so used to being on and present and making an impression, you can do things that are a little bit goofy. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
practiced a breath of joy, or to do that in front of the board and to lead it when, some people are going to be excited about it. And some people will be like, some people think this is incredibly awkward. It takes some courage to create a space where you can, it just, again, demonstrates the lack of perfection, right? We're all coming to this with our own individual experiences, our impressions, our expectations, and being willing to be a little bit goofy and imperfect is fantastic.
I think it was how it was received. Thank you for saying that. And it's interesting too, because it reminded the experiences I'm reflecting on. It reminded me everyone comes to yoga differently, and
Dog
um,
intro.
we had several male executives and male board directors in forward fold, which I've now done for 25 plus years, and I had almost forgotten as a beginner what is it like to go into forward fold, head below the heart, your hamstrings not necessarily open, and what that feels like, and helping someone, particularly those who are board members or your CEO, to find and to gain some level of comfort with the position. It was like this experience of, okay, as a teacher, you have to remember to be a beginner as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gift, isn't it, to see other people and to read bodies?
Very much.
Yeah.
What's one small daily practice you believe makes a workplace more courageous and connected? It's a question for both of you. A practice off the mat that makes your workplace more courageous and connected.
One thing actually I could offer, even just today, we have a team newsletter, and for me, it is pure joy to receive the newsletter, because the team newsletter to me is reflective of the core and soul of the team. So there's elements in the newsletter that are, and we produce it, over a period of time. There are elements that you first open the newsletter, and there's introductions to team members, and it's something personal that they like, something that they do in their free time, or that they have done that brought them joy. And then there's discussions around legal areas, things that are new and novel in the industry, and then projects that we work on that we can celebrate. So I think that practice of celebrating where you are today is something that is core to yoga. Alice, you were talking about the different, just getting people to take positions that they haven't taken before. There was a few years ago during the pandemic, I had a frozen shoulder. Actually, I had it in both shoulders. I couldn't move. And so there's things that I can't do today that I could have done before then, but there's things that I absolutely thought I would never do again that I can do today. And meeting people where they are and bringing them along a journey, I think, is part of our everyday experience as well.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I've used the newsletter with the encouragement to people to use it as an opportunity to express your individuality, so that we can each see your individuality and be grateful for it. I think that one is huge. Another one I would throw out there would be to simply like incorporate breath. It's really very simple. Yeah, it was, I think the meditation and wellness for legal department speaker at one of my team offsites that helped us with this. But just the act of you can begin a meeting, or you can even sort of take a pause during a meeting and encourage everyone to close their eyes, which in a business environment feels risky, and take 3 deep inhales with a pause and an intentional, audible exhale. And it's really miraculous how that really sets a tone of coming to the conversation with clarity and calm and a little bit more openness to listening.
I am practicing this now. I feel my feet on the earth. I lift my torso up off my hips. I feel my breath in through my nose. I was teaching a more challenging pose in a flow yoga class the other night. And in a flow class, you will often hear the breath in the class. And so there was a point I was like, are you all breathing? So I say and breathe. And everyone, there was some laughter, right? They were so focused on and I was like, bring it back to your heart, bring it back to your breath. It's doesn't matter what it looks like. You don't, the shape, you arrive in the shape through your body, right? You're not trying to create some perfect shape, some best of. It was a great moment.
I think that says it all. You're not trying to create best of. You're trying to be where you are today in this moment.
Final question. If you could offer one yoga-inspired principle or practice to lawyers seeking to lead with more presence and less pressure, what would it be?
Oh, I'd stick with practice, not perfection. I think we are trained as lawyers, through school and in our early practice to get the right answer and to be right. And it's okay not to be right. It's okay to manage the perception of whatever somebody's feeling, and to be able to respond to that and say, I can understand why that's not intuitive to you. I can understand why this may be frustrating. So let's walk through the outcome. Let's walk through the perception index and practice, go through the practice of walking through steps and understanding expectations.
Perfectly said.
I completely agree with that. I think what I would offer would be, to practice regularly and to take on appropriate challenge. So, in yoga, there's the gratitude of being where you are in that particular pose, whether, your hamstrings are straight or your knees are bent and it's the first time you ever got into it. And then there's the principle of, while you're in it, find the place where you can challenge and stretch yourself, but appropriately. You do not want to break, hurt yourself, hurt other people. But if you then practice that regularly, you will look up in a year, 5 years, 25 plus years, and you will find your experience of that pose to be much deeper. And it's because you practiced it regularly and you said, I'm willing to challenge myself, and I will challenge myself appropriately and do what I need to do to find that next step.
Mm-hmm. Wise words from Alice Geene and Carolyn Herzog. Thank you both so much for joining me for Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living and offering your advice to help other lawyers as leaders level up in their leadership, to provide and create these communities, to cultivate trust, and to bring more thriving workplaces to the world. Thank you both.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with a friend. And please send me your feedback. I would love to hear from you. You can learn more at sparkpluglabs.co.